At the crest of a nearby hill stood more revelers, warming themselves by a bonfire inside a giant hedge circle. Musicians dueled softly at its perimeter. And she continued, I asked for a round of applause for Terry's service. I'd like to vent to the content, and she has taught internationally.
Back at school in Oregon, and Nadine Diskett Miller. Emily proved a great wall text painter, and Nadine, among other things, helped prepare the soil for the Robert Carl, who's a composer, not only for the beautiful sound component that's in the galleries that he composed for the carbon emissions are doing to our oceans. Her landscape was once under an ancient sea. Wes often quotes, yes, yes, it's a kind of multi-sensual experience that I don't usually then ever put it forward. Don't know what. So
U-shaped, surrounded by a terrace. And sometimes if I didn't think anybody was out there watching, I would turn the key off on the tractor and get down, and I'd lower the horizon by laying down on the ground. And after a minute, I could feel the water of the primeval sea there kind of washing over. That, of course, was there before the corn. It was there before the prairie even. And I get a little bit of that feeling in the gallery here today, so you should go check it out. So at this point, we have gavelled in the annual meeting of this movement that we're all a part of here. If we were all Methodists, we might start out by singing the gathering hymn that starts, "And are we yet alive and see each other's face?" We're not all Methodists here, unfortunately, but we imagined sustainable agriculture. I'm guessing a lot of the rural folks here were thinking of field crops, maybe a 3 or 4 crop extended rotation. If you're really on the ball, you were thinking of perennial grain polycultures. You probably had ruminants out on pasture on this farm. I'll bet that you were making most of your money from your actual farm operations and not from subsidy programs. But I wonder how many acres this farm was. I'm sure that it was a lot fewer than your conventional neighbors in this vision. But land is expensive, even on a lower number of acres. And I wonder in this vision, how easy is it for young people to get into agriculture? Is it even possible at all for economically disadvantaged people, even at the scale that I myself imagine in this vision? In the vision, are there customers in the picture? If there were, what's your accountability to them? What's your connection to them? Not in an abstract sense, but in a real sense. Now, urban folks, in the vision that you had, you were thinking of urban farming systems, no doubt, that were making the cities you live in vibrant. They're providing healthy, high-quality food, maybe in a food desert, revitalizing neighborhoods, connecting farmers and consumers, old people and young people. But I want to ask that even after all the vegetables that you produced are consumed, even at the rate that we're supposed to be eating vegetables, double check, was your diet most likely still based on staple crops like whole grains, healthy oils, vegetable proteins, maybe animal proteins? And where did those staples come from? How did they flow to the city? How were they produced where they came from? Were those practices sustainable for the production that was going on in this urban ag vision? I'm sure you're doing a good job recycling visions, necessary visual setting, all the biophysical, incomplete 110 parts per million atmosphere people in Carson's. Now, for my part, is to be tensions into of their family and they marketing lives, the city of Chicago proper. Although I often like to point out that she grew up just a few blocks away from the last commercial field crop and livestock farm in the city of Chicago, where that once was. But I want to talk about Melissa's great-grandfather for a minute here. Joseph Cavillo was born as Jose Cavillo in Silao, Mexico in 1892, and he immigrated to the U.S. in about 1916. He and his wife, Mary, made their way to a job within about a mile of each other. Now, we have no reason to think that our great-grandfathers ever met, and even if they did, Millard Lambert spoke no Spanish, Joseph Cavillo spoke little English, but I feel confident that the economic interdependence that they had was at some level obvious to them at the time. The interdependence their families had, their neighbors' neighbors. No farm products, no railroad. No railroad, no agriculture, at least of the kind of agriculture that was practiced. No food, no that people trod to carry out practical matters of human existence. And what I wonder now, as Melissa and I are raising the great-great-grandchildren of Millard Lambert, understanding sometimes will be literal, many other times they'll be figurative, but one way or another we need to find our crossroads here. And so we're embarking on this conversation here about urban and rural and how we cast a perennial vision for the future. And so I want to introduce our first stab at this here, which is a panel that's come together around an important book here, Letters to a Young Farmer, that was published not long ago by the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture in New York. We have today with us to moderate the panel the woman who, along with her colleagues, spearheaded organizing it, Jill Eisenberger, who's been in the top echelons of the Nature Consultant, into the panel, and we'll get started.
Decades, but we also wanted to bring in some of the new voices. As a person who grew up in a rural area and who is seeing this urban food movement and watching people become really interested in food, but watching people who don't really understand what it takes to grow food. So, Amigo, I'm going to kick it off with you. So you are a self-described back-to-the-lander, but you first started growing food in the 60s in the backyards in San Francisco before moving to Northern California and putting down your roots. So you chose an agrarian lifestyle after having had an urban one. And
Thanks. Years later, is now urban agriculture is thriving, still small. Organic agriculture is thriving. We're just unwinding that phenomena right now. Same thing with gardening. It's time to unwind the kind of stuff we were basically brought as what's acceptable and get back to what our grandparents knew and had done for thousands of years. So I think there's this rural-urban divide, which is still gigantic. And I think that's the next part of this, is how to actually connect up and appreciate the farm community for those that are not farmers, and vice versa, for the farm community to appreciate the urban community more than just customers. There's a lot more to say. Let's see this as a group project, and that's
as what we need to fight. And that's been one of the most wonderful things about being in this book is the Congress that it brings together. I really love Amigo's essay. You know, 90% of farming is all the same. And his encouragement in person and in the book to have conversations across that divide. You know, we have to do that. I don't know the mechanisms that we need to make a citation in that Country Life Commission of farmers to see what they needed to get their own happiness. And Illinois keeps cropping up in the conversation today. A Grange in Illinois got together and met and said, you know, answered the question, see what we could do. And the response was so eloquent. He said, what the farmer needs is a mechanism where the consumer understands his work. People don't know what it takes to get morning the Prairie Walk. And the first thing I thought of two things. I thought of, we're walking in a long line through the grass, and here's this long line of people and plants. That's what we are. We're a long line of people and plants working together to eat. And for bread, working with nature means sourdough. Most of the pancakes in this world are made with baking powder, which I also adore, but it is a chemical leavener, and it's an abbreviation of the natural process that happens when we are courting bread through sourdough. Hands around a farmer who he was a farmer growing up, you know, a multiple generation farmer, and I was getting that memo that dumb farmers, even though they're in all the accelerated math classes with me, I don't know. I don't have an easy answer, but that I can still have a relationship with a multiple generation dairy farmer who's conventional, is not gonna switch to organic at any time. He sells to a co-op, but he has hope. I gave his daughter the book. And so he has it. He said, I have the book. I should give it back to you. I said, no. You can keep it. People who are doing it.
You talk about empathy and
Well, they put most of this as support. So I'd love it if the media, you know, and I know Michael Pollan a bit, and Michael did us a disservice by vilifying large-scale organic farming as well as vilifying conventional agriculture. You know, instead of doing that, let's focus on the positives. And, you know, every farmer I know that's conventional, that's spraying an herbicide or an insecticide, they're not really very excited about doing that. They're doing it to survive. That's the technique they know. The marketplace won't generally give them a premium for being innovative unless they go the full route and become certified organic. And so they're really treading on a treadmill on thin ice. And so you know, the difference between profit and loss might be that herbicide application, which relatively is inexpensive. And if you factor, instead of help them stay on that chemical treadmill, we got a lot of money invested in that, and there's going to be some shakeout when they take away, if they ever take that away. But that needs to happen. We need to actually get everybody off the dole, no matter what, and actually have the real innovative farmers succeed in a marketplace that actually supports them. There's a huge change, turn on investment in that. So I think there's lots of challenges. I also think there's a lot of opportunities. So we got a long way to go.
So who's coming to you and asking to, you know, given what you just articulated, why are people coming to you and saying, I want to make a change? And who are they?
Ooh, that's a good question. You get a broad spectrum of whys. You know, you got everything from the person, farmer who's, you know, seen his child come up with some kind of strange disease and wonder if that's coming from the well or the exposure to pesticides. You've got people who have been watching their neighbors succeed, going, well, wait a minute. If Joe can do it, well, I could do that. That's been an interesting piece, because now he had people, you know, for a long time, they, you know, conventional farming world said, you know, you're just going to go broke if you go organic. Well, no, actually, like I said, they're not going broke. They're doing better financially. You know, nothing like seeing a brand new pickup truck and an addition on your house to get someone's attention down the street. And, you know, it's really, it's that basic. You know, that's what a lot of the stuff we measure this by our wealth. So there's that one. And then there's just a lot of people interested because they see an emerging market and they fill up against, you know, they're up against it conventionally. They don't actually have an emerging market. The prices are.
How do we support that and grow that?
A lot of help from of people, but opportunity. You'd think that understand.
Well, I gave this to these young kids who had quite a bit of experience, and they're pulling it off. I'm kind of thinking this farm's going to actually make it. I see the end of the second season. I saw them completely blitzed out in August again. You know, when they're doing too much with too much heat and too little time, even though it's 12-hour days. But you know, you kind of have to do that. So, and then the other part is there's just no responsibility right now being taken by all the profit makers to support this change. We need to have the grocery stores of the world, the chain stores, the processors, all the trucking companies, all these people are making all this money and supporting the farmers so they could actually do this. So they could take a piece of the land and loan it, give it to a kid to get it going, and also help that kid get through this process. And, you know, I mean, Whole Foods does a little bit of this, but there's really very rare to actually support the farmer at the basic level of here, you know, here's a subsidy, here's a loan, here's the basic things you need to do to get through this process to get started. And I think that's a huge responsibility. General Mills, as big as they are, have a lot of capital. They could make a big change. You know, or you name whatever the business is, if they decided that they really want to do is support this transition. And I really think that's what we got to get now is the moneyed interests the wealth of people. You know, there's all these wealthy people with money, they don't even know what to do with it. And they should be investing in small farms.
They invest in Juicero.
Pardon?
They invest in Juicero.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of investing in the farmers. And I think we should turn that around and make it important and valuable to actually invest in the young farm community and take some of those assets that America's so famous for and apply them in really making this transition. And it all can happen. There's a lot of money laying around, and I happen to know some wealthy people that have been doing that, and I'm really proud of them for having put their money in that new effort, and that needs to expand.
It feels like that could expand or be a place where the urban-rural conversation could come together and that there's an opportunity there. So it would be interesting to the things you all said in the book. The more you looking at humans.
To it, it's there. High-tech solutions are coming. All colors.
That's not his business practice.
Sure.
His business practice is to get things as cheap as we can get.
Sure.
I know some people who try to do business and no longer do.
Well, it's a really good point. I mean, Whole Foods made an effort, wasn't a substantial one, but I think they got that from pressure, actually. I think that truthfully there was a lot of people saying, hey, wait a minute, you guys are turning a lot of profit on a high-priced item. How about turning some of that back to the farm community? No, I don't think Jeff Bezos is likely to have that same ethic, if at all. So how does that change? Well, it comes back to consumers. You know, they run the show, really. If consumers were motivated in any form to speak strongly with their dollar, the people with the money are going to follow it. You know, it's not by coincidence that the Safeways and Costco's of the world have organic in there. It's because there's people wanting it. So given that there's people that want it, now if the consumers were motivated to say, hey, come on, let's take some of that profit and turn it back into your farm community, then there probably would at least be a sniff of an effort. I really think it's not so much just ethics, and there's a fair amount of them get it, and they want to put their billion. That's a good idea. So
One right here.
I would say we're not bosom buddies, but at least we walked away with a respect for each other at the end of it, that this hippie wasn't just here to, you know, create havoc for them, but actually had something he could share. And I acknowledged they knew a ton. You know, I picked their brains about all they knew, which not all, but what they knew, and showed them respect that what they knew was actually really critical to farming, and then they just needed a few more ideas to be successful as organic farmers. So and I feel that same way when I'm involved.
I think his name is Sean Sherman, the sous chef. His book is just out from University of Minnesota Press. He's just been approved to get a restaurant on somewhere in Minneapolis that is going to be indigenous food. So the high chef world that he comes from and his the reservation already.
My grandfather went to Chicago. Why? In 1919, him and thousands of African Americans, black folks, came up from the South. They went to Chicago and lived in the boarding houses there. From there, my grandfather enlisted into the Army, fought in World War, dragging brush. We're going to keep this place from burning down because there are 953 people in that jail. And this farm where we're located, which is really a jail, that's 145 acres, that has gotten no care, no work other than the work that me and my staff have put into it for the last 35 years. So there's no one clearing the brush, keeping the place from burning down but us. And we do have a few tractors, but mainly the stuff is done by hand. Skip off, and if it happens, have them say, whoa, 100 and I can do it, so if I can do it, and not in Yosemite, where they had been unemployed, they had been on welfare, they had been homeless. But the difference for me was that every day I saw my father go to work. Every day I saw my mother go to work. And so, but then while they were, Catherine, you got to grow more vegetables. You got to get more to us because these guys, they can't afford to buy a $4 bunch of collards. They can't afford to buy vegetables. And without the vegetables, they're not going to have the health. That's true for the kids in the pantries as well. But what I've seen is that Um, but Vincent learned how to work. He learned what work is. He learned what happens when people can appreciate working. But he also, while he was there, was a pastry chef for 23 years. So one day he mentions to me, well, you know, when I was in prison, I apprenticed with the pastry chef. Well, because it let me be out of the cell longer. And I was like, does that mean you can make things, bake things? He's like, yes. To have them say, gee, today we cleared those invasive weeds, and I saw the blue butterfly that I was told needed the native plants that we planted. I did that. And the city of San Francisco is going to use the plants that we went out and made.
Which to me, not that I'm discounting how you're using those and how you're giving those away, but it would close the connection or close the circle if the inmates are also eating of the vegetables that they're helping to cook. Those are my 3 questions.
Okay, that's very easy because we don't work with prisoners anymore. That was an easy answer. Seriously, we had prisoners in our program from 1982 to 1992. And the reason that we don't have prisoners now is because most prisoners are many years. That's all he knew. But he was calculating all those grams and whatever in his head, no calculator, and with the cops on him and with a smart kid. Anthony is now the labor supervisor for the water department. Anthony is negotiating $1 million, well, I think the budget for the labor department is, I would say, more than $100 million for the city. Anthony's negotiating those contracts now. Anthony's in charge of the laborers now. And what I know is that Anthony, with his 8 children, would have continued to go back to prison had I not said, no, Anthony, I'm not going to hire you because when you were in jail, I kicked you out because you were fooling around. And so if you're going to be serious, then come tomorrow. Anthony came tomorrow and went from there to now he has a job. And his kids haven't gone to jail. John Thomas.
Registration table, get a drink, use the loo, and come back quickly.
I was reflecting that yesterday was my first time to chair the board. Pretty damn nervous, to tell you the truth. I follow in the footsteps of some amazing folks, but I shared with them something that I want you to consider. I said it occurred to me that as pleased as I am with the stewardship of my, for your contributions, no matter what.
California. So it's always amazing to me to watch him conduct a meeting. I've been with him in meetings in Montana, in which
all of America's great treasures. So I'm very pleased to have this, and I will exercise economy, and I'll just say that it has been one of the greatest honors and pleasures of my life to serve on the Land Institute board, and I look forward to many years of continued participation in that board under people.
Well, here we are again. This is the way it happens. This morning I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story. The setting is the Kansas River, about 110 miles here. Change may be coming, and in some unexpected quarters, but it's going to require a serious engagement in a transformation. The beginning of the story. Strawberries, asparagus, rhubarb, blackberries, bluegrass pasture, potatoes, tomatoes, radishes, table beets, peas, onions. That is for all of the plots. Asparagus, yield 10,226 plants. Asterisk, yield extrapolated from 0.1 acre. This sort of activity that was on that farm in the Kansas River. Chicken in the summer, the fattening steer and the butcher hog in the fall and winter, the rendering of lard and the making of lye soap for the weekly Monday morning wash day, January 1, 1946. They came through the Golden Gate together, but were separated to the hills, but many had been stranded. And on that summer I encountered the pitiful reality of Native Americans and the contrasting ideas of the many immigrant ranchers about their purpose in life. Mostly Scandinavian, they too came with vision, but not with sight. And Ina another. When Bertha died after a 20-year marriage, Andrew Swan and Ina Stover married, joined their holdings, and continued to add land. On some Sundays, I rode horses over those prairies with two teenage brothers whose father was known as a half-breed. They told me of adventures wildly unfamiliar, both their own, they had roped a deer, and out of their parents and grandparents. They pointed to a hill where their Indian would be trapped into buying a bottle of whiskey. It was mostly stars. The only lights were raiding, fence riding, flat high. Economics became a big thing in rural areas. Human, above and outside humanity. It places the health of the ecosphere before human welfare with verifiable information. The third old religious question, what's to become of us, is as far as creaturely life is concerned, well, largely be up to us. So this oil and oil thing wasn't that bad. I learned to read during rationing, reading the signs. To save tires, drive under 35. So I'm going to quit only because Rachel's back there and she's fuming around and so on. And also I've said enough.
Thank you.
The rate of soil development and this sort of thing. It's a very slow process, I can tell you that. The soil of the Midwest took thousands of years to develop. I was hired at the Land Institute in 2001 primarily to work on what we called perennial wheat. This was a program where we're crossing wheat with a perennial grass. We have perennial plants that we eat that are out of the perennial grass with the features of wheat that we like. Big seed, stuff we can make bread out of, with good yield. We're trying to bring those two things together from different species. That's a very complicated, challenging task, and we're still working on that here. We have a lot of different experiments here with the intermediate wheatgrass, or kerns as we call it. But this is like the heart of the breeding program, where we put out huge numbers of plants. So plant breeding is sort of like looking for a needle in a haystack. You're looking for that thing that combines the traits that you really want. I think every one of us working here believes that we're in this project to make a real change. By having a large...
Take 50 to 100.
And have 20 years.
There's just so many sources of contamination and sources of greenhouse gases in the food supply chain that we eliminate by doing things the way the O'Briens are doing it here.
Cattle tend to eat the grass right down to the ground, where you're not going to see that with buffalo. And so they kind of maintain their own pasture.
The bison are awesome, but it really starts with the land. It's managing it in an appropriate way that keeps the soil and the grasses healthy, so that's critical. We're really grass farmers, and bison are one of the tools that help manage it. And of course the meat is just a byproduct of that.
Right. Well, this is the Buffalo Nation. We bless the buffalo that's given to us.
What I felt was good stuff.
Grains represent some 70% of our calories, grown on about 70% of our acreage worldwide.
Our crops that we currently grow for grain are all annual plants. And annual plants,
As much of a non-renewable resource as oil.
the rate of soil development and this sort of thing, it's a very slow process, I can tell you that. The soil of the Midwest took thousands of years to develop. I was hired at the Land Institute in 2001 primarily to work on what we called perennial.
About that time it dawned on me that what really needs to be out on these Great Plains is the indigenous animals. And so it didn't take me long to figure out that I needed to go to buffalo.
On the Great Plains, with the vast harshness, you need something that's a little bit more sturdy, that doesn't require all of that maintenance.
Well, you need something that evolved here.
Starting the buffalo on grass, finishing the buffalo.
The scientists that have been here this week is, to me, an affirmation of, corny as it may seem, what I've felt in my heart for a long time. You know, I've always thought that it's too bad that soil is sometimes thought of as synonymous with dirt, because it's not. It's really more like gold. The fact that this stuff is pumping, carbon from where it's doing bad stuff to where it does good stuff.
We're here actually doing the sampling of the soil and measured for its carbon level to understand statistically whether there's differences in the different pastures that have been grazed by buffalo. So we've succeeded in doing quadrant number 1 of Uno. They build organic matter, they create soil health, and the grasslands can be improved greatly by putting bison back on the landscape.
The thing that I try to keep in mind is that in some ways, every species is of equal value. They all have their place.
The chemistry, the ecology of the landscape, and the relationship with people can be reinvigorated. So what a spectacular opportunity.
Nature loves diversity. Humans are always trying to centralize. We want to commoditize everything. And it's wrong. You have to break that paradigm.
There's 60 million acres of wheat in this country. Basically, it's all the same. It's been defined by a commodity system. What if you go out of that and pull in what could be there and what could be there? Spring here. The students are going to do crosses here, and basically you just take pollen from one parent and put it on another. We don't call this genetically modifying.
Driven by conventional farming practices and large milling industry and large baking industry. We have never specifically bred for organic farmers. So we've never bred for farmers who, instead of using chemical fertilizer, are using organic fertilizer, or using compost. We've never done that before.
The beauty, I think, of what we do is and have the right functionality and flavors and nutritional value in the end.
Well, in June, we planted about 4 acres of buckwheat. The variety is called Koto, and it's a bit of an experiment. This is a much more viable crop than growing feed barley. It's going for a human food crop as opposed to a feed crop, which typically is very low value. It would be easier if the whole valley was one crop. You know, we just went and did that crop and sold it on contract. But I think it's healthier for the farmer to have this diversity. It's healthier for the soil. It's healthier for the community.
Agricultural revolution is not going to come through technology. It's going to come through, in a lot of cases, the old ways of doing things.
The miracle of salmon, where to begin? Salmon are amazing creatures, indicators of the environment, as close to medicine as food gets, and a wonderful resource.
Their identity, and it wasn't until '92 when I bought this gear that I really started to experience something different about fishing.
In the past, all fisheries were relatively robust, and so you could use gears that caught all species. And now we have some fisheries that aren't doing well and others that are doing really well, and we need to have gears so that a fisherman can catch the targeted fish without hurting the non-targeted fish and release those fish unharmed. If we're going to have salmon in the future, we need to look for new tools. But in this case, the solution is not a new tool, it's an ancient tool.
Well, the whole job starts with spotting the fish. If we don't see them, we can't catch them. Typically, I'm in the headstand and I'm looking out over the water, trying to spot a school. A lot of the times it's real obvious. You can see the fish plain as day swimming through. Other times it's just a very light color change or even just a feeling. When we spot them, there's a big commotion, go, go, go! Or the classic call is give her hell.
Instead of many fisheries where they're caught by their gills, they're just trapped in a purse and they slide them off into a live trap.
A lot of these people would not be here. It's not just a job. People are passionate about our fishery and what we do here. It matters how we do things, the way we individually handle fish one by one, the respect that we catch salmon with.
We're showing that this can work. And every year we'll get a little tighter, we'll grow a little bit more, and one foot in front of the other.
Then to me, you're not really trying. It's a bit lazy, right? Is to just accept what's handed to us. And there's no better example than food.
I know Yvonne He's been out and seeing these fisheries for his whole life.
Doesn't, oil depths year-round. They have also built above-ground towers that are 4 meters, or about 12 feet tall, to observe and sample different plants, roots, and rooting zones. Among a small list of deep-rooted species they are studying intensively are our own silphium oilseed crop, kernza, and alfalfa. There's fascinating ecological research taking place in Kansas as well, and the next 2 folks up will be describing some of it. A project I wanted to mention is the establishment of the first commercial perennial biculture plots. Up until now, kernza that has been grown for commercial applications has been grown in single species stands, often organically, but using manures as nutrient sources. This summer, the leadership of Patagonia Provisions indicated that they were interested in taking Kernza production beyond minimal organic certification or compliance to the most regenerative level possible today. After some back and forth, we agreed that sowing 10 to 12 acres of perennial legume and Kernza intercrops at the Perennial Agriculture Field of Professor Valen. So we're a little nervous. I will pause. Land Institute since last Prairie Fest. Some of it, okay, has a pretty large amount of organic matter, but we still have reduced respiration because the microbes are actually not able to get at a lot of this carbon since it's being tied up in these. So hopefully that gives you a sense of why what we're doing will help address the issue of resequestration. And if you start playing it in through your head, why other approaches that people have to pleasure to introduce two colleagues, two postdocs, who are at the University of Kansas right now. Liz Kojal is a postdoc in Jim Beaver's lab, and she's working on mycorrhizal fungi in our systems and in analog.
I'd like to start talking to you all today about what I did before I came to the Land Institute. So my background is in prairie restoration work and with mycorrhizal fungi. I study arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which are below ground soil microbes. They aren't like the fungi that you eat. They're microscopic, and they spend their entire life cycles.
In monocultures of conventional agriculture, farmers typically ameliorate these pathogen problems by using crop rotation. So they either till or herbicide and then plant a different crop, and then you can avoid the pathogens. However, in perennial agriculture, with the absence of crop rotation, there may be a need to plant a...
I'm going to ask Lee DeHaan to come up and tell us a few things that have happened with Kernza this year. It's been kind of a big year for Kernza, and so look forward to what Lee has to say.
Come.
Thanks, Lee. And like Lee said, there will be a panel on Kernza commercialization tomorrow morning. So, and now I'd like to welcome Stan. Are you both coming up, or are you coming up first? Okay, Stan.
Domesticated in East Africa about 8,000 years ago as a crop, and has been grown on the continent ever since. It came here. Was brought here in the 20th century from East Africa and South Africa by USDA and university, or drought-resistant sorghum, super ratooning sorghum, and eventually perennial sorghum that's adapted in those countries. And I would I'd like the folks who are we've been. Some of them are here because this week we is Dr. Balua Nebi from Mali in West Africa with the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, or ICRISAT. Is Yana here? Oh, where are you? Oh, in front, Dr. Patterson. Eric, he would.
And those rhizomes are what are making Stan sweat a little bit to make sure that things go right. So in Kenya, under this project, I am a sorghum breeder. I've worked on sorghum for the last 29 years plus in ICRISAT based in Nairobi. There are many other things we do other than the perennial sorghum. Then we are going to the right direction, because sorghum is resilient, that is true, but it's relative, because there's a limit, you can also push it. The climate is changing. The rainfall patterns are changing. The president of Tanzania, who is neighboring Kenya, just put the other day that the rainfall is becoming very clever, in quotes. So the farmer...
In perenniality and any other traits, because if such associations do exist, then that will hinder the breeding work. So we've been piling up lots of phenotypic data in the field.
But we've started seeing a lot higher survival when we cross using durum wheat, the pasta wheat.
Well, I don't want to sound too boastful, but
Previously, the fungal colonies grew to great size and the leaves turned yellow and wrinkly. And while many moth-eaten heads just seemed to give up and turn to mush, possibly secondary infections, we do
not cross-contaminate the plants that we've worked so hard to keep healthy. So that's going to be the plant pathology, and not only do we have that, but it is attached to a plant pathology lab. So we are currently in the process
to plant out here and to evaluate over the summer. And so my current task has really involved figuring out how to grow many different species, looking for which species have large seeds, have kind of croppiness type features to them, and starting to choose some to grow out here in Kansas. And so one of the specific characteristics that I really keyed in on and was looking for in plant species this year were legumes that had an erect growth habit with a terminal raceme. So they have this nice kind of raceme stalk with the flowers and stems on them that can be easy to harvest and is going to be above the green leafy material of the plant. And so one of these species that I planted out this year that kind of has that characteristics are lupins. And you might know lupins as kind of the ornamental flower that you've seen growing in gardens. They're very pretty. They have big, beautiful flowers on nice racemes that rise vertically from the center of the plant. And lupins have also been domesticated 4 different times. There's 4 annual lupin species that have been previously domesticated or consumed as grains by humans around the world. So we thought there was a good chance. And we performed the selection that we wanted to, and now we've narrowed down our list of candidate species to work on. So I'm excited to replant out those species that did well next year and start making selections. We also looked at alfalfa as a potential dual-purpose perennial grain legume and forage, kind of like we've been talking about doing with Kernza. And we planted out more than 1,500 alfalfa transplants this year. They were very hardy, did very well in the field as we expected. It's a common crop. One of the best parts of alfalfa is that it's very broadly adapted. It can be grown near the equator and all the transfer. Alfalfa we know is a lot of these plants, we plant them and they grow a year without flowering and producing seed. They need some vernalization period. The first year they're kind of feeling out their environment and getting well established. And I feel like this was definitely a getting well established year. There's many interesting high throughput sequencing techniques and imaging technologies that have been mentioned. And I'm looking forward to using them someday. But this year we really learned a lot about how to grow plants well, how to measure the traits that we would eventually want to use in our breeding program. What tools do we need? We've acquired the right equipment to plant the crops in the field. So this year was a year well spent. I can imagine next year being a year where we're actually flowering, and I can't wait to see that happen. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Brandon. And we're approaching the end of this research update. If you've been here in the global inventory that Brandon's here, so Alice.
Another terrific Prairie Festival. I'm at the Missouri Botanics, and the long and the short of coming in behind that. Now we're sure. 6,656 perennial herbaceous legumes, and the Asteraceae is in progress. Sorry, David, we're still working on it. We've built a web-accessible, searchable database called Tropicos, where we didn't build Tropicos, but we built our project within that, where you can search through these taxa. We're populating that database with agriculturally and ecologically relevant trait data, and that the database will be searchable by those traits. I have a handout, soon root biomass and root architecture, to determine general differences between these 2 categories, annual and perennial plants, within the same genera. Okay, and then lastly, with regards to lupins, Claudia conducted a terrific series of field trips this summer to collect wild germplasm material of a species we're particularly interested in, Lupinus polyphyllus. So she spent time in Colorado, Idaho, and Oregon visiting native populations, collecting seeds, some of which have already made their way here to the Land Institute, and also leaves for population genomics analyses. So one of the things we're looking at moving forward is trying to bulk up the collections. The agricultural exhibit is in its just beginning its 2nd year, and they had over 200,000 visitors last year. So Maddie was kind enough to allow us to plant Kernza, Silphium, and a Medicago and alfalfa hybrid on display. And we've already been out there at least a couple of times talking with visitors about perennial polyculture agriculture and these crops. So in summary, the Global Inventory Project has been a productive venture that's expanding, we hope, the botanical foundation for perennial polyculture agriculture. I'd really like feedback from any of you. If you have thoughts or questions, please come see me. And thanks so much for your attention.
Vitek. I don't see him. Oh, there he is. Bill Vitek, Wes Jackson, and our postdoc, Aubrey Strike crew are going to come and educate about our Ecosphere Studies program. Ecosphere Studies is a program that is one of our newer programs, but it's focused on studying more deeply some of the oldest or broadest sort of foundational ideas of the Land Institute. So I'll welcome them.
Or trailblazing. The list can go on. Groundbreaking just doesn't seem like an appropriate way to identify what's praiseworthy anymore. So with this in mind, I'm going to try another kind of big picture way of thinking, an imaginative thought experiment to introduce Ecosphere Studies to you. So say we all agree that what's happening here at the Land Institute offers the potential for turning this 10,000 year or so trajectory of agriculture. It's been on this path and we're starting to turn it. So mental powers of Homo sapiens, and pay close attention to the image that's emerged for you mentally. Is it blurry? Is it in clear focus? Are you seeing a community from the past? Are you remembering something? Are you seeing an aspect of your own cultural tradition, something that's been marginalized and needs to be brought back to the center? Are you seeing some other contemporary culture that's different from yours that we need to pay attention to again? Are you sensing that there's coming from? So the question I'm posing is, what would be required to refresh your imagination of what's really possible and of real paths to get there?
Aubrey and I are going to go back and forth, and then Wes will get up and say whatever he wants. Correct us. Good afternoon. We think that what is required to imagine and then live into the future is a new understanding of where we humans are in the first place, and from whence we, in a domination-subordination dynamic, surplus agriculture and its analogs have also promoted species extinction, human population growth, climate change, and social injustice. The Land Institute's Natural Systems Agriculture has recognized and started to address the problem of agriculture through plant breeding and ecological intensification. And what our research program and Ecosphere Studies is suggesting is that the insights of the whole long-range vision of the Land Institute's work can be applied more broadly in other areas to enact social and cultural change. If we seek, quote, a community life at once prosperous and enduring, as the Land Institute
capacities for knowledge, and we're going to need to keep acknowledging our ignorance. I mean, we have to recognize the complexity of reality. There may not be a simple catalyst or a simple way to predict which catalyst is going to make an everyday interaction on Earth into a transformatively ecospheric one.
So as Wes likes to say, we have to proceed by rigor, not by recipe. So over the last 3 years, Ecosphere Studies has been building a constituency, generating and testing ideas, and educating resources such as multimedia videos, guided reading lists, and maybe even courses. We want to make this available to anyone who is interested. Experiment number 4 is to connect what we do in Ecosphere Studies with community resilience, which is going on around the country and around the world. In this case, with the Land Institute in Salina as the Ecosphere Studies hub, as we imagine it, we want to explore collaborations and public events with local education, government, and city planning, food production, medicine and health, businesses, churches, and activist nonprofits here in the Smoky Hill watershed. Experiment number 5 is to take this idea of building resilience into building a network beyond this hub and to develop partnerships with organizations that are doing similar things to what we're doing it in different ways in which we can all learn from each other. So in experiment number 5, we want to engage with other groups whose work aligns with ours to develop broader networks of relationship at regional, national, continental, and global skills, and to partner on shared investigations. And we are beginning to work with an organization in California at Claremont called Ecological Civilization, and they're partners in China. So we're already starting to reach out and begin to build relationships. And finally, experiment number 6, creative expressions. Ecosphere studies is not just hair shirts and boring philosophy lectures, right? We want to have fun. We want to dance. We want to sing. We want to write poetry. We want to connect with artists. We want to celebrate the
platform. None of us, I don't think, could have imagined it. It's even now that we can imagine it, we have to think hard about it. But I'm tempted to think we got to have half-time using the opposable thumb on the hand that creates